Now, good afternoon and welcome at our 8th session. The name is Roelf vanderMerwe and I'm a director at vanderMerwe Robertson Attorneys. A special word of welcome to 3 of my fellow directors, George Robertson, Eugene Groenewald and Christel Pansegrou. And then a word of welcome to our guest speaker, Dr. Andrew Golding, CEO of Austen Property Group, and also Theo Vorster, CEO of Galileo Capital. The program was already distributed to everybody, and after Dr. Golding's and Theo's talk, we will entertain questions already received. Now, just a special word of thanks to our IT team who assisted us in a very short space of time to move from Microsoft Teams to Microsoft Live Events. Literally done in a blink of an eye to accommodate requests for people that further want to join our weekly sessions. And thanks there to Kees Snijders, he's the CEO of FlickSwitch. Henry Fell is the project manager at Galileo Capital. And then to my fellow director, George Robertson. We've got just a slight hiccup getting Dr. Andrew Golding live. So we're going to start with Theo Vorster. So Theo, CEO of Galileo Capital, doesn't need any further introduction. Theo, the platform is yours.
Thanks, Roelf. Thank you very much. And I assume you can all hear me. Now, given that we have Dr. Andrew Golding that will talk about the economy, I decided that today's talk is not going to specifically be about the economy. Although at some points we will have to touch on the economy, since I think that is critically important for all of us here. But let me first start by sharing just a few basic slides with you, just to give you an idea of exactly where we are in the world and what is the position with regards to our position. So if I want to start off with, I think we need to have a look at, just to give you an idea of the total confirmed deaths at this point in time. Way ahead in the world is the United States. And I only took a few countries. But basically the reason for that is to show that South Africa lags quite handsomely relative to the world. I've got specifically Brazil there because all indications are that within the next few weeks, Brazil is going to be the country that will probably get the most focus. They are growing at an incredible rate. They are currently the 3rd country in terms of people infected, although their deaths are quite a bit behind. So I assume that if we talk again in the next 2 to 3 weeks, Brazil will start to feature high up here. Brazil is also probably the country that has the closest resemblance to South Africa, in the sense that there's a small, very advanced first world community in Brazil, and then a very big community that live in less than ideal situations. So as time goes on, Brazil will probably show us what will happen as we continue. And also next week, our guest is Professor Marcos Neves Fava. He is a professor from Brazil. His speciality, and he's a world-renowned specialist in the food and agriculture value chain, but, and this is a big but, he's also specializes in strategic planning, strategic forecasts, and he's going to join us on 2 fronts. First of all, explain the Brazil situation and what is going on there, because remember, Brazil is one of the countries that have the most loose lockdown rules. They are a proper federal state, which means that there is no uniform lockdown rules. There's various rules, and it'll be interesting to see where Brazil goes. And remember, South Africa was at some point not far behind Brazil. The second point is these numbers change handsomely if you look on a per capita basis, and this is per million people. All of a sudden, the UK is then ahead of these 4 countries. Sweden is between the US and the UK, and Brazil is, although timeline-wise, behind, because this is noted in terms of days when every country reach a certain point. So South Africa is way down below timeline-wise, but also numbers-wise. And again, Brazil is going to be the interesting one going forward. I want us to look at for a minute, because we forget, this is the surplus or additional total excess deaths during the outbreak. Why is that important? People keep on saying, but these number of people would have died. They would have passed away in any case. Now, this is a number from the Financial Times, and it's I believe it is data that one can really rely on, but this shows the total excess deaths during the outbreak. Look here, South Africa, we've got no excess deaths. Israel, Iceland, Norway, no excess deaths. And then you start to look at Italy. So 24,500 Italians, that's 55% of the normal deaths, passed away during Corona. That's additional deaths. Belgium, Austria, UK, 54,000 UK people died as a result of outside of the normal deaths. And that is something that over time will become more and more important as people look at this. The US, 52,000. I think that's where we need to look at. But the following slide shows you where currently this is at its peak, where this mortality is peaking, and you're starting to see South America coming through, Brazil, Ecuador, Brazil, Peru. And you're starting to see the developing countries, Indonesia, starting to come through. Whereas if you look at the Italian places, London, they are starting to come off. So in effect, and what people need to realize is, remember, yesterday was the biggest deaths per day ever in this virus. Now, why is this important? This is important simply because this thing is not going away. This thing is starting to pick up in different areas. But what I would like to do now is I'm going to spend the next few minutes specifically talking about the position more on the political side. Dr. Andrew Golding will talk about where we are when we talk about the economy. So let's talk about the economics. It's clear that South Africa will face 3 headwinds in the next few months. Now, first of all, let me just give a timeline and why these headwinds are very important. From a political side, the ANC government would have had their General Council, their National General Council in June. That National General Council was postponed indefinitely. Why indefinitely? Just purely because a date hasn't been set on it. But it will come at some point later in the year. Now, what is the key element of the National General Council? It is not a leadership council. It is a council which is midterm Congress to hold the elected officials responsible for the decisions taken at Nasrec. That's from a political point, that's the one timeline. And just 3 of the elements that Cyril Ramaphosa as president will be held accountable for is, number 1, how far are you with expropriation without compensation as decided at Nasrec? How far are you with nationalization of the Reserve Bank as decided as Nasrec? How far are you of the prescribed assets on pension funds as decided at Nasrec? That's some of the points that the National General Council was going to try to put to him in terms of decisions that were taken at Nasrec. So the first thing is that is an internal ANC meeting that at this point in time is not going to take place. We don't know when. The second timeline is in April, May, next year, we will have municipal elections. And all of you can remember in the last municipal elections, the ANC lost some of the big metros in South Africa, specifically Nelson Mandela Bay, Tshwane and Johannesburg. That will be coming along at some point. So from a political point of view, we are seeing that there's a few events that's slowly starting to build up. Now, from a leadership in the ANC point of view, this is an ideal situation for the ANC if your mantra is to provide leadership. Well, the ANC wants to let people believe that they can provide leadership. So this is a position whereby from a political point of view, they're putting themselves into this to provide leadership. So the first point is on the political side, we are starting to see elements going out. The second point is the medical challenges, the medical timelines. We are, whatever model you look at, we are going to peak in terms of infections in May, June, July, not May, June, July, August. And in terms of deaths, we will be at high points somewhere late in August, September and October. If you believe the high road or the low road in terms of the optimistic or pessimistic, that is what's going to happen. The economy is the third element. So the economy will start to become almost in an untenable situation in the next 2 or 3 months. So my view is you will have these three worlds starting to collide in round about June, July, August. Politically, the ANC will become under more and more pressure. There will have to be very serious decisions made on the one hand. Economically, we will start to see the real impact of this coming through. And then obviously, medically, we will start to see the numbers. So that medical, economic, political environment is becoming closer to us. But what I would like to share with you while we wait to talk about the economic side is like all organizations, the ANC internally has from time to time surveys undertaken in their senior management to try to ascertain how are they doing. Now these surveys are done by a support basis within the ANC, primarily business that supports the party, but also some of the older leaders that have is not in senior positions, structure these things. And then what they do is they go towards the senior members of the ANC, both provincial level and national level, the members of the NEC, the members in provincial structures, and they try to survey these people to see what is the feeling in terms of the quality of the ANC leadership and where are we. Now, why is this incredibly important? This is important simply because there is the pressure that will mount on the party, on the cabinet, and on Cyril Ramaphosa's leadership is going to increase as time goes on. This is important also for them to try to make sure to what extent are they on the right track in terms of their leadership and what is the position of that leadership. So this survey was done last week, late last week, and the key of the survey was to get enough people involved in this so that they can make sure that this is actually a kind of a survey that holds enough qualitative measures to be scientific and to be used as a scientific measure. So first of all, they believe the size of the sample, the structure of the sample, the representation of the sample, and the numbers of the sample, obviously, in terms of where people are on the party, is good enough to say there's probably a less than 5% margin of error in this. In effect, there's a 95% sure that this is the outcome of the membership in the ANC. So this is specifically not me and you, was not canvassed here. It was people within the ANC, within the leadership structure that's strong enough to influence the way it's going. Now, the first point is, what is the perception of the government measures? In the sample, 90% of the people supported the government's measures and actually believe they're doing a good job. Only 4% was critical of the government's measures. So at this point in time, the rank and file senior member believe the government is doing the right thing. In effect, if you break that 90% down further, about 40% of the 100%, actually 39%, believe they're doing a great job. So to a large extent, the government has got support of the people that put them in power. Economic impact, well, that's negative. 84% of the people believe that this will be negative, that once we get out of this, we will not get back to where we were. So there's no question that not only does the leadership recognize it, and some people say, but does Cyril and these guys know it? Well, the rank and file decision maker in the ANC believes it's the impact is negative, and it's going to be very negative. In effect, 64%, which is, I didn't highlight here, but 64% of the membership believe is not going to go better if they lift the lockdown. It's going to take time to go better. The lockdown alone is not going to change this. So what we need to remember here is that a large portion of the membership think it's not going well. Well, what do they think of the performance of the cabinet? Now, this questions from cabinet leadership, ANC's leadership or party leadership, and the president's leadership is specifically framed around COVID-19 and the way they acted. This is not overall. This is the reaction to the COVID-19 decision-making process. Well, 46% of the people here said that the view of cabinet increased. So this question is not the question to a chance if you support or not. This is the question, did your view of cabinet increase or decrease during this period? So 46% of the ANC membership, senior membership, view of cabinet increased, or the way that they view cabinet is now better than it was before. 19% is worse. So this is not supporting or not supporting. This is, did your view improve or did your view go down? 46% of the people's view improved of cabinet. ANC leadership, 48% view has got a stronger view or more positive view of the leadership, whereas 17% has got a more negative view. So when people say, how do they feel about the party, they're actually more than positive. Then the president's leadership. Now, why the president leadership as an individual is important? And that's part and parcel of what the people that actually embarked on this survey wanted to find out. Because there is always stories going about as to where does the president stand within his party, what's the president standing, how strong it is. And I think, yeah, I want to take you back. Remember that the Cyril Ramaphosa won in Nasrec by a paper-thin margin, an exceptionally thin margin. So when you talk about Cyril Ramaphosa and his position, one must always realize that it was a paper-thin margin that he won by. So what does the senior party members currently feel about the leadership? 62% of the people actually has got a better view of him now than they had before. That means if you look through all these numbers, you find that the view of the president and his leadership position is now, you can't say 62% better than it was, but 62% of the participants said that they feel better about him as a leader as they did prior to COVID. And I think that kind of shows you that there's a lot more confidence in him as leader than is in his cabinet, than is in the party. But the other point that is important is only 7% of the people actually thought less of him now than they did prior to COVID. Now, the key elements of this and why I think this is important for everybody is that at this point in time, there is a lot of stories as to where is this going to and where is everybody moving towards. My view is that if I look at these numbers, it is clear that the economy is a major issue for everybody concerned, and that the economy is going to remain under pressure for quite a long time. But from a political point of view, his leadership is strong enough that it will most likely survive at this point in time. But, and this is why I started the discussion on this, we are going to get into a critical juncture in the next 3 months, August, September-ish. And why is that? Because that's when the pressure on the medical industry will be at the absolute peak, number one. So from a medical point of view. Number two, from a financial point of view, economic point of view, because simply we cannot maintain in this lockdown for much longer. We will have to get out of this ASAP. And I think Andrew Golding will also support that point, number two. And number three, from a political point of view, at some point in time, these forces are going to start to put pressure on the governing party, and at some point in time, some of the members in the party would most likely like to challenge leadership, simply because at this point in time, it creates the ideal platform for leadership to flourish. I don't think, do we have Roelf, do we have Andrew on the line?
Yeah, Theo, give me 1 second.
Hello, Theo, George Robertson here. While Roelf is getting Andrew on the line, maybe just a question that we received from one of the attendees. We have various sources to keep track of the progression of COVID cases. So what source do you recommend we should keep an eye on to look at, risk and level of increases and changes in those levels?
I tend to use the Johns Hopkins University in America, simply because I think from day one they tried to be the best source of numbers. So the Johns Hopkins University in America has a great website that updates a massive amount of information. Then number two, the Financial Times in London. They've got very detailed, high quality analysis of specifically what's happening where. And however one believes what is fake news or not fake news, and it probably depends if you're looking at CNN or if you're looking at Fox News. But the Financial Times, I find, is quite, their quality is very good in terms specifically of COVID-19. Then two other sources that I look at from time to time is the New York Times and the Atlantic, which is a publication on the west coast of America. But my first two choices is Johns Hopkins University, number one, and number two, the Financial Times. And both of them has got interactive information that one can follow.
Thank you, Theo. Back to you, Roelf.
Theo, thank you. I've got Dr. Golding on the line.
Just perhaps while we wait, I note the question was more, where can we find the an index for the social uncomfortability in the South African environment or not? And I think that is to do with the fact that the longer we carry on, the more difficult this whole issue around managing the process is. Now, if you look at the structure of cabinet, which I didn't, one of the questions I didn't elaborate on the slide was specifically the membership's view, and I'm going to start with the membership's view and then I'll work it back. The question that was put is, what is the membership of the party's view of how the police and the military is handling the situation? And the questions there was twofold. Number one, the first question was, is there experience that they actually are competent to do that? And number two, how good are they doing at their job? Now, the answers was all between 67% and 78%. So clearly within the party structure, they believe that the police and the military is doing a great job in maintaining peace and order. If that's what everybody else feels, I'm not too sure. The rank and file members believes that the police and the military is on top of it and they're doing a great job. Within the decision making in the various structures, the measurement of social security or insecurity sits with a Minister of Police, Mr. Tsele, which unfortunately is one of the people that in this whole process showed himself to be a very more towards a dictatorial or a instruction-based environment and not a pure liberal social democracy, whatever you want to call it. The sad part is that he is the guy responsible to giving the message through to government. At this point in time, there's not a specific measurement or tool that one can use, but what one needs to realize is every day that passes, the social destruction of keeping the economy closed is going to grow. But unfortunately, Chris, I don't have a specific tool or measurement instrument. all I can go with is what comes from the security cluster, and at this point they're comfortable that things are in hand.
Theo, thank you for that. I've got Dr. Golding now on the line, and I'm not going to waste too much time introducing him. Dr. Golding, without any further ado, the platform is yours. We're listening to you.
Thanks very much, and apologies for having to be on the phone. So if I understand the mandate correctly, it's to try and give you a sense over the next 15 or 20 minutes or so of our view of status quo of the property markets, an international perspective, and then also an attempt to just try and look at some of the trends and influences that we think are going to impact on the market over the next 6 to 9 months. And in that process, try and give a sense of what needs to be done. So I think, obviously, in terms of a preface, we're faced by significant uncertainty, volatility, ambiguity, and complexity. The industry has basically been shut for the last 8 weeks, and that's been on 2 fronts. So the deeds office has been closed, which means that any transactions which were already in the pipeline have been unable to be completed. And then in terms of new deals, the industry has effectively been shut down. So that means no income and no sales. I think most property companies have taken measures over the past 8 weeks to reduce their costs, but obviously cash flow is absolutely key here. And in terms of the way that the residential industry is structured, most of it is small operators who certainly don't have many months of reserves. And so the longer that this goes on, the likelihood is that we'll see significant destruction of many companies in the real estate industry. In terms of what's been happening over the past 8 weeks, I mean, there have obviously been very few sales. The rental market's been reasonably okay, in that I think, much to our surprise, we've seen rental collections of up to around 80% of expected rentals. But obviously we find ourselves in unprecedented times in terms of tenants and landlords and negotiations that have got to take place, very unusual circumstances, circumstances that are basically outside of any contractual arrangement, and where compromise between landlord and tenant is probably the order of the day. Over the last month, we've seen from a tenant and landlord perspective around 20% of tenants expressing the view that they're unable to meet their rental obligations, and that's just after 1 month. And many creative solutions having to be found in terms of borrowing money from parents and friends, and renegotiating or reconstructing personal loans, and generally trying to find a creative plan to prioritize the payment of rental. And it remains to be seen what's going to happen in the immediate post-lockdown period. But our sense is that many transactions are going to have to be renegotiated, and an agreement, a new agreement, effectively found between tenants and landlords. I think in terms of the international perspective, there's no doubt that many markets have behaved in the same way that ours has, and it's particularly related to the level of lockdown and the severity of lockdown. So, for example, New York in its lockdown period saw new listings drop by as much as 90%, and that mirrored the international markets of China and Italy. I think one of the key questions to answer is what's going to happen post-lockdown, and I think there are a couple of scenarios. It's obviously not clear exactly what's going to happen, but I think there are some logical conclusions. I think the first thing is that there is going to be pent-up demand immediately post-lockdown, and that's both in the rental and sales environment. But once that pent-up demand is met, I think we are going to have to face a significantly reset property market, where certainly people who don't need to sell are certainly going to hold on to their properties. I think we're going to see significant destruction of value, and there are a range of scenarios which include a 10% reduction in costs, in value, all the way down to as much as 20 or 30% in terms of house prices comparing pre-COVID to a post-lockdown environment. I do think it's difficult to generalize across the whole market, and certainly the South African market is made up of a number of very different segments. So if you compare the top end of the market, say above 10 million, to the middle or lower end of the market below 1 million, I think those markets are going to behave very differently. But clearly we're into a prolonged buyer advantage market, and where sellers are going to have to either take their properties off the market or accept what, generally speaking, opportunistic buyers are going to be prepared to pay or want to pay from an opportunistic perspective. In terms of the residential industry itself, we believe that there was an error made in terms of the classification of us in the risk-adjusted matrix, which currently sits at a level 2. And it's not just about the people who work in the residential industry, property industry, but rather the affiliated industries, which include everything from the construction industry all the way through to the mortgage origination and conveyancing industry, and then ultimately the man in the street, who in many instances needs to create liquidity out of their residential properties in order to save their businesses and save jobs. So the effect on the economy has been significant with the shutdown of the property industry, and we do believe that that was a significant error. The rationale for rating us as a level 2 has been seemingly related to the extent to which the engagement of the residential industry is going to increase infection or the propensity for infection. And much of what's been done from an industry perspective recently has been to try and lobby the government and the authorities around an acceptable protocol or series of procedures which would enable the minimization of any increase in infection or hotspots. And so that includes everything from monitoring everyone who enters or exits a potential property. So that would be in the tracking and tracing environment, to sanitation and hygiene measures, which would include, for example, the fact that only one prospective buyer at a time could go into a property. Preferably the seller wouldn't be present in the property at that time, notwithstanding potential security concerns around that. The fact that that prospective buyer wouldn't be able to touch any of the surfaces, that the property after that visit would have to be sanitized, that show houses would clearly not be possible, and a range of other procedures which would need to take into account a fairly stringent protocol, but one which has been implemented successfully in countries like New Zealand and Australia, the UK and the US. So we're hopeful that certainly in terms of a re-rating from a level 2 to a level 3, that could happen at the end of May if there is a countrywide re-rating to level 3. I think that what we're likely to face in the sort of pre-vaccine environment, which could be anything from 12 months to 18 months or longer, the residential industry is going to have to reconfigure and re-engineer itself, and that's going to require a significantly greater emphasis on digitization and a virtual capability, an online capability, where really the only remaining physical component of what we see in the residential transaction will be the physical viewing of a property by prospective buyers, and probably to affirm what they have already more or less decided in the virtual environment, that is the property for them, through videography, enhanced commentary and photography. I think that buyers are going to have to begin to get their heads around making a virtual selection, which they would then just confirm in the physical environment, as opposed to the old environment of being able to view numerous properties through one agent or through many agents, and in that way refine their search. So I think that the whole industry is moving very swiftly towards a virtual transaction environment, and certainly in terms of the processing of those transactions, most companies are now looking to the capability of being able to, for example, take online offers, have online negotiations, online document signage, and effectively online conclusion of what was all done manually and physically previously. So I think also in terms of trends that we're likely to see post-COVID. Certainly the remote work environment is likely to be here for a considerable period of time, and that's going to have an effect on buying trends and usage trends, where already we're seeing inquiries from clients who are potentially looking to change the way they operate. They, in some cases, need more space, not less space, and are looking to a work from home environment that allows them to continue to do that. We're also seeing at the beginning of what we think is a trend that we've started to see internationally as well as locally, around people looking to move to more rural locations with a view to being able to work from home from there in a non-densified environment. One of the interesting trends is that we were used to the fact that commuter hubs in the large cities were desirable locations because they provided access for people to be able to get to and from work reasonably easily. But now with the work from home trend, it's likely that those commuter hubs might not be as attractive as they were in the past. And that can potentially change the pricing structures of various suburbs in cities. So I think in summary, we really don't know what we're going into. I think if we were to have a best guess around what the market is going to look like over the next 6 months, we think that the transaction volumes across the country are probably going to decrease by as much as 50% on an aggregate basis over a 12-month period. We think that property prices are probably going to realize a discount of around 10 to 20% of what they were pre-COVID, and that's our best guess at this stage, and we're only really going to know once the market opens up and once we get a sense of what's really going to happen and how much distress there is with property owners and the extent to which the banks are going to be prepared to defer debt and just how much financial distress there is, which we believe is going to be quite significant.
So Dr. Golding, thank you very much for that very, very insightful view of the property. And I've got no doubt that the economic picture is bleak. I mean, after 8-9 weeks, we're now on grassroots level starting to see the effect, and it's a concern. We are a law firm, as you know. We sit on bank panels, and for 8 weeks we couldn't register any bonds or transfer any property. And I mean, therefore, attorneys that doesn't register can't pay out proceeds, and obviously cannot settle estate agents' commission. So I mean, the knock-on effect is just tremendous.
Yeah, and I don't think there's very much in the way of ability to hang on for that much longer. I mean, I've been quite surprised at the extent to which the industry seemingly has been resilient to this point. But should this carry on for much longer, our estimates that as much as 60% of the industry could go out of business.
Yeah, and that is people that is going to be unemployed.
Yeah.
Dr. Andrew Golding, thank you very much for your talk, and we have managed to get you via the phone here, and I think the participants heard you loud and clear. Thank you for your time and your insightful view. We appreciate. And Theo Vorster, back to you.
Let me just, in conclusion, before I take questions, I think however we look at it, the next 3, 4, 5 months is going to be very difficult. And I just, in my last remark, I want to just quote what Bill Gates was saying. And I've said it in the past, but I keep on saying it. We will only have a true normal. And he uses the word true normal. We will only have a true normal again in the middle of next year, in the middle of 2021. And I think the key element there is that we are not close to the most difficult part from a medical situation than a lot of other countries. We still have to get through that peak, but I think everybody needs to plan and position themselves so that by the time we reach the middle of next year, because hopefully by then we will either have a form of herd immunization we will have a form of a vaccine, or we will have a form of a treatment that means this is not as dangerous as initially expected. And it's probably going to be a mix between those three. But my last comment is, before we take additional questions, is that everybody needs to plan so that we will only have a true normal by the middle of 2021. And I think that is the case for everybody. So any other questions, I'd be happy to take them. Is what do I think will the value be of agriculture land post COVID-19? Now agriculture land is one needs to be careful if you answer that question, because there's a few factors at play when you look at agriculture land. First of all, if you look at there's broadly speaking two valuation models that are used by agriculture funders. Broadly speaking, two models. The one model is purely the market value with a haircut. That means an agriculture company would say, and there's quite a number of them that will do that, that will say an independent valuation given the property in the area and given what market rates are is X, and we're willing to use 70% of X as your surety. That's the one element. The other element that's used is purely a production value. That means if a property can generate a certain amount of value, of certain amount of production, then how that is being used is that's discounted to what it can carry in terms of value. Now that's usually between 50 and 70% of the market value currently where we are in South Africa. So the point is, property values, although they have been very volatile, specifically in certain areas that had bad harvest, the link between property values and the long-term production yield of certain crops is probably closer to where it is. I don't think COVID-19 specifically will have a major impact on property values. What is more important is any trends that we saw prior to COVID-19, those trends will be accentuated and will be pulling through. If you just look at the crop that's now in the initial stages of harvest in the summer rainfall, maize areas up here in the Free State and Northwest Province and in Mpumalanga, from a monetary value, this will be the biggest monetary valued crop in the history of South Africa. From a monetary value, it's not the biggest in terms of tonnage, but if you take the tonnage added by the price currently yielding, it is going to be a bumper crop, which means those properties will probably remain in play and will not come down. Property prices in agriculture is more a factor of the commodity price and the trends in commodity prices. I don't think it will specifically, that will have the big impact on it. Okay, well, how is the expropriation without compensation and municipal property rates going to play out? I'm not too sure. All I know is that every entity that has a budget with the expense side that they don't want to manage, that means personnel expenses, infrastructure expenses, will be under pressure from an income side. I'm not sure how that will play out, but I guess there, unfortunately, Chris, I think Andrew would have been in a much better position to answer that question. I don't have a real answer for that. Is there any public or private sector initiative that promoting specifically localized manufacturing? Matthew, I'm not aware of that, but that is, if you look at the comments from the ruling party and from government, one of the elements that we will see coming out of this is localization of manufacturing, of retail, of economic activity, and that's going to happen worldwide. So I think we will see things like your regional shopping center, your small manufacturer, shorter supply chain participants will be in a better position than the rest. So I'm not sure of any public or private initiatives at this point in time, but I do think that'll be part of the longer term position that we will be in. And I think we will go a lot more local, and bar for medical science and a few others, we'll almost go more closer to our communities and share information within the communities and strengthen the economy within the communities. I hope that assists with your question. Roelf, I think that's roughly the questions that I can have a view on.
Yeah, Theo, thank you very much. I've got Matthew Dundas. He's the CEO of Austen Dundas Property Group on the line. And we've asked Matthew just to thank both Dr. Andrew Golding and yourself and conclude our session. Matthew?
Thank you, Roelf. Thank you also to you and George for putting this together. It's insightful every week and a privilege to get the insights of yourself, Theo, and Andrew, who joined us today. It's not usual that we get such clarity on the kind of macroeconomic picture, and obviously in the housing sector, it's always great to get something that is very transparent and honest, and that was certainly what Andrew gave us today. Thank you, Theo, for preparing as you did, and it's greatly appreciated, and your time is valuable, and we thank you for it. Thank you all.
Thank you, Matthew, and thank you for everyone that's attending. We are looking forward to next week's session, and we'll distribute that invite early next week. Thank you very much.